Hello comic book people, it's Wednesday, so that means it's comic book day. Let's see what I got. First up, there's a C-3PO one-shot special from Marvel Comics. This issue is a prequel to The Force Awakens and explains how C-3PO got his red arm. Surprisingly, it is much sadder than I thought it would be. Speaking of Star Wars, issue number 19 from Darth Vader also came out. There's a civil war taking place on one of the Empire's planets called Shu-Torn. Darth Vader is there trying to quiet everything down, but in a very Darth Vader kind of way. This issue is the conclusion to that storyline. I'm loving this comic book a lot. I love seeing all these little side storylines for all of these characters in the Star Wars universe. And this is all being done by Marvel, aka Disney, so it's supposed to be canon. Next up is All New, All Different Avengers number 8. This is part of the standoff storyline that's going on through several different titles in the Marvel universe. S.H.I.E.L.D. obtained some shards of a cosmic cube that became its own entity. They were trying to use this entity to manipulate an entire town to house a bunch of supervillains. But obviously that was going to turn against them at some point. All of the different teams of the Avengers have been brought to this town and they somewhat were fighting against each other. But then they were fighting the villains who had all been brainwashed into thinking they were citizens of the town, and the cosmic cube entity that was in the form of a young girl bonded with Deadpool, of all the characters. But this redeemed her and now she's freed everyone. There's only going to be one more issue to this storyline. It is somewhat confusing that you have to read all of the other Avenger titles to understand what's happening in this storyline, which I do read all of these titles, but still, for an outside person who maybe only reads one of these titles, it is something that could be frustrating. But this leaves off on a very special note, which leads me into the next title, Captain America's 75th Anniversary Magazine Special. I'm sure many people are already aware of this, but Steve Rogers had the super soldier serum taken from his body, and he aged to be the age he should be. But he's been restored back to his regular age by the Cosmic Cube. The Cosmic Cube's name is Kobik, by the way. But this 75th Anniversary Magazine issue isn't really a story in comic book terms, it's really just something going through the history of Captain America. It goes through his originators, which was Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, not Stan Lee as many people like to think. Stan Lee didn't come in until the 60s and then started writing Captain America. I won't go into the aspect about how he may have had a role in some of the writing that took place way back then. That's something else altogether. But this magazine is really good, especially for people who want to have insight into Captain America. Some of the behind the scenes stuff is put in there, plus overviews of different stories about Captain America and what he's done with the Avengers and in the Marvel Universe. So I would definitely recommend reading this. It was really good. A very special issue of Hercules number 6. I say special because Hercules has already developed his own side characters, his group of characters that are supporting him in his storyline. And they've made it clear that Hercules is trying to reform his character image so that he's no longer laughed at and he's not thought of as the party superhero. But something they made abundantly clear in this issue is that Hercules is a recovering alcoholic, which makes a lot of sense if you think about his past storylines. He's not the first alcoholic to be introduced into the Marvel Universe. I think Iron Man is probably the most notorious, probably the most well-known out of all of the alcoholics in the Marvel Universe. But Hercules is now joining that ranks, and this is something that I think is pretty good that they're putting into the story. This is something that's very real and probably going to be on the back burner of the comic book series all the way to the end. So I am very glad that they put it in there. Next up, I got Zena Warrior Princess issue number 1. This is published by Dynamite Comics. I was a bit disappointed in this. I was hoping this was going to be a reboot where they could go into any direction they wanted with Zena and her characters. But it turns out this takes place a little bit after Zena and Gabrielle were put in suspended animation for about 20 years. Which is okay, it's not the worst thing ever, but still I was hoping this was going to be something completely different that we haven't seen yet. But instead it's just a side story that really won't have a whole lot of bearing on the character or her development. I'll continue on to read it, but I'm hoping that maybe they can change this or at least propel them in time a little bit, maybe after the series ended, and find a way for Zena to come back from the dead. Finally, I got Harley Quinn and her gang of Harleys issue number 1 of 6. Obviously, this is done by DC Comics. Harley's gang of Harleys, who have been introduced some time back, are finally getting a bit more individualized, and they're being shown a lot more in this storyline, where this mini-series is going to be focusing on how they're developing and how they're working together. They're all given their own individual costumes, and I gotta say, I'm a big fan of all of them, especially Harvey Quinn, the one male member. I think I see a future cosplay for myself down the line. This is definitely a cute series. It is taken seriously somewhat, but it's still something more comical than anything else. And Harley's popularity has soared through the roof lately. Everyone seems to like her characters, so I see this as being a pretty good miniseries. DC also released a free preview comic of some of the comics that are going to be coming out from the Rebirth. I am very interested in to see what's going to be happening, and I'm watching very closely to the DC Universe. I am somewhat concerned that Red Robin, Tim Drake, is going to be under training again from Batwoman and Batman. I'm loving his new costume. I hate the idea that he's still called Red Robin, having having the 2 R's on his chest, but I'm hoping that he's not going to be regressed to a character where it's like he doesn't know what he's doing. But there are a lot of other comic book titles that I'm very interested in reading, and I'm hoping that the Rebirth is going to reinvigorate a lot of fans to come back to the DC Universe. That's enough about that. That was my comic load for this week. What did you guys get? Leave comments down below. Thank you guys for watching me in this video. Be sure to check out my Patreon site, my social media site, my website, and everything else out there. Peace, love, namaste, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.